After one man died from the illness and his co-worker was contaminated, the FBI has taken over the investigation.
What happened?
These people are plotting to kill me.
Gilbert went missing after that 911 call. Her remains were found in a nearby marshland more than a year later. The police search for Gilbert led to the discovery of 9 other sets of human remains.
School children are nice targets. I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, shoot out the tires, and then pick off the kiddies as they come bounding out. That was the threat of the Zodiac Killer. The psychotic killer has already murdered 5.
This is the Unsolved Crime Iceberg. It contains a bunch of morbid stuff, so buckle up. I'll be going over things such as the Chicago Tylenol Murders, the Valentine's Day Massacre, and the Axeman of New Orleans. Without further ado, let's begin. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in the poor areas around East London during the late 1800s. Attacks linked to Jack usually involved female prostitutes who lived in the slums of Whitechapel. Police began receiving lots of reports of horrendously mutilated bodies, and it caused rumors to spread. These rumors stated that a man by the name of Jack the Ripper was going around killing prostitutes. However, nobody had ever seen or heard of this man in their lives. Further investigations showed that there was a pattern with the murders though. Most of the women had their throats cut and abdomens mutilated. The 5 most well-known victims, dubbed the Canonical 5, are Mary Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. The body of Mary Nichols was discovered in the early hours of the 31st of August, 1888. Mary had been seen alive approximately 1 hour prior to her death. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts and her genitals had been stabbed numerous times. The lower part of her abdomen was partly ripped open by a deep wound, causing her bowels to leak out. A week later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman's body was discovered at 6 a.m. near some steps. Similarly to Mary, Annie's throat was severed by 2 cuts. Her abdomen was cut entirely open this time, and part of her stomach was placed on her left shoulder. On her right shoulder lies the intestines. Annie's autopsy revealed that sections of her bladder and genitals had been removed. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed in the early hours of September 30th. Elizabeth's body was discovered off Burner Street in Whitechapel. The cause of death was a single clear-cut incision across her neck. The lack of additional mutilations led to uncertainty as to whether the Ripper was the perpetrator. Several witnesses had later informed police that they had seen Elizabeth close to Burner Street with the company of a man. However, each witness gave a different description. Now you might think these incidents were bad. They were way more tame than Mary's case. The extremely mutilated and dismembered body of Mary Kelly was discovered lying on her own bed. Her face had been quote-unquote hacked beyond all recognition, and her throat was cut down to the spine. Her abdomen was almost empty of all its organs. The weirdest part from the whole thing was that the heart was missing from the crime scene, meaning the perpetrator took it with him. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is one of America's most popular American serial killers of all time. Zodiac claimed to have murdered dozens of people, with couples being his main target. The man captivated the media because of the subtle hints he drops inside of the messages that he sends to authorities. Zodiac began sending coded messages taunting the police soon after his first murder. He signed these letters with his own symbol, a circle with a plus sign going over it. He infamously sent a letter that said, "This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is ... and it shows a bunch of random symbols. Apparently these symbols were supposed to be an encoded version of his name. However, to this day nobody has cracked the code. St. Valentine's Day Massacre. St. Valentine's Day Massacre was the murder of 7 Irish members of Chicago's North Side Gang. The incident occurred on Valentine's Day during the year 1929 near a garage in Lincoln Park. The gang members were lined up on a wall and shot by 4 unknown shooters. 2 of them were dressed up as police officers. The incident was caused by the lack of control on organized crime in Chicago during the prohibition of alcohol. The perpetrators have never been completely identified. However, gang members working for Al Capone are the main suspects. The incident ultimately intensified the rivalry between gangs in Chicago. JAT Flight 367. Flight 367 was an incident where a Czechoslovakian plane was somehow damaged, causing it to crash. Out of the 28 passengers on board, a woman by the name of Vesna was the only survivor. A man in a nearby village heard Vesna screaming and came over to help. While the woman was getting treatment, others began investigating in order to get a better idea as to what happened. Vesna claimed that quote-unquote a terribly annoyed man was seen entering the plane, and she believes he put a bomb in the baggage area. Apparently it wasn't just Vesna who saw this either. Multiple crewmates noticed it as well. Regardless, nobody had a solid answer for why the plane crashed, causing conspiracy theories to arise. One of the more popular conspiracies is the shoot-down theory. It states that the Czechoslovakian military shot down the plane because they thought it was an enemy aircraft. Also, the plane was flying extremely low over a military facility, so that could be used as evidence. To this day, nobody knows the real answer as to why the plane mysteriously crashed, but people believe that it resulted from a bombing. The Valerie Axe Murders. The Valerie Axe Murders occurred in June of 1912 in the town of Valerie, Iowa. It begins with Josiah Moore and his wife Sarah taking their 4 kids to a Children's Day service at the local church. Accompanying them were Lena and Ina Stillinger, who were neighbors that asked their parents for permission to stay the night. The church service ended at around 9:30 p.m., so everyone decided to go back home and get some rest. At about midnight though, the killer picked up Josiah's axe laying in the backyard and entered the house. All 8 people, including the children, were bludgeoned to death. The bodies were discovered the following morning by some neighbors, and a deep investigation took place. All the victims were found in their beds, head covered with clothes, and their skulls battered 20 to 30 times with a blunt end of an axe. 2 used cigarettes in the attic suggested that the killer waited patiently in the attic until everyone fell asleep. The killer began in the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore were both sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been destroyed so badly that his eyes were missing. The ceiling in his room also had a gouge mark from when the murderer lifted the axe to kill him. The killer used the blade of the axe on Josiah while using the blunt end on the rest of the victims. The 4 children of Josiah and Sarah were bludgeoned to death in the same way as their parents. Investigators believed that all victims except for Lena were asleep when murdered. They figured she tried to fight back since she was found laying sideways on the bed and she had a wound mark on her arm. There were several suspects who were tried for the crime. However, the first trial ended in an indecisive vote, and the second ended with the suspect free of charge. The crime remains unsolved. 2001 Anthrax Attacks. The 2001 Anthrax Attacks occurred in New York City and lasted several weeks. It began on September 18, 2001, just 1 week after the September 11th attacks. Letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to several news media offices, killing 5 people and infecting 17 others. Anthrax is a fatal bacteria that causes breathing difficulties and is usually contracted through cattle or insects. The first set of anthrax letters were mailed to ABC News, CBS News, and NBC News, the New York Post as well. All of them were located in New York City, and during the following weeks, many workers would get infected and some even died. At least 22 people developed anthrax infections, 11 of whom contracted the life-threatening inhalational variant. Authorities believe the anthrax attacks were mailed from Princeton, New Jersey. Investigators found anthrax spores in a street mailbox located at 10 Nassau Street near the Princeton University campus. Hundreds of mailboxes, which could have been used to mail the letters, were tested for anthrax, and the Nassau Street box was the only one to test positive. In the letters sent to the news outlets, the letters A and T were sometimes highlighted by tracing over. According to the FBI, these highlighted letters contained a secret code. When the FBI isolated the bolded letters, they got TTT, AAT, TAT. Apparently the 3 letter groups are sequences of nucleic acids that correlate with an amino acid. I know that makes no sense, but looking at an illustration makes it easier to understand. From the analysis, the hidden meaning, FNY, corresponded with a verbal assault to New York. However, this translation was never confirmed to be true. The Chicago Tylenol Murders. The Chicago Tylenol Murders were a series of poisoning deaths resulting from laced drugs in the Chicago area during the year 1982. The victims all took Tylenol branded capsules, but these capsules weren't just normal Tylenol. They were laced with potassium cyanide, and 7 people died as a result of the crime. No suspect has been charged or convicted of the poisoning since then. The incident led to upgrades in the packaging of over-the-counter substances. The Hinterk Murders. The Hinterk Murders was an unsolved case in which a family of 4 and a maid were brutally murdered in their home. The incident took place on some isolated farmland in Germany during the year 1922. It's speculated that the crime was committed on the night of March 31st, and that nobody in the town found out about the bodies until a few days later. People of the town were suspicious of the fact that the family hadn't been heard from in days, considering the fact that the town was so small. A group of farmers decided to check up on the family and found them all dead. The maid and 2-year-old Joseph were found inside the house while everyone else was stuffed into some hay. I don't know why, but it seems like a common thing for murderers to cover up the bodies of their victims. The Cleveland Torso Murder. The Cleveland Torso Murderer was an unidentified serial killer who was active in Ohio during the 1930s. The official number of murders attributed to the Torso Murderer is 12. However, recent research has shown that there could have been as many as 20. The victims were usually hobos whose identities were never determined, although there were a few exceptions. Victims numbers 2, 3, and 8 were identified as Edward Andresi, Florence Polillo, and Rose Wallace. Edward and Florence were both identified by their fingerprints, while Rose was identified by her dental records. The victims appeared to be lower class individuals, meaning easy targets, especially during the Great Depression. The torso murderer always beheaded and often dismembered their victims, occasionally cutting their torso in half or cutting off their limbs. In many cases, the cause of death was the decapitation or dismemberment itself, meaning the victim was still alive when they got their body cut in half. Many of the corpses were found a long time after their death, sometimes up to a year. What made it even harder to get evidence or identify the bodies was the fact that their heads were typically missing from the scene. The Lake Bodo Murders. The Lake Bodo Murders is a homicide case located in Finland during the year 1960. It begins with 4 Finnish teenagers that decided to camp along the shore of Lake Bodo. 2 of the teenagers were 15-year-old girls that were in relationships with the 2 other 18-year-old boys. Sometime during the early morning hours of June 5th, while everyone was asleep in their tent, both of the girls and one of the boys were found stabbed to death by an unknown attacker. The only survivor of the massacre fractured his facial bones and obviously appeared to be a victim. He stated afterwards that he had seen a glimpse of an attacker clothed in black with bright red eyes coming for them. At around 6 a.m., a group of birdwatchers apparently saw the tent collapse and a blonde man walking away from the site. The bodies of the victims were discovered at about 11 a.m. by a carpenter who alerted the police immediately. The investigation found that the killer didn't injure the victims from inside the tent, but instead attacked them from the outside with a knife. Apparently the police somehow forgot to record the details of the scene. This would later become a major issue because it allowed the group of people to trample and disturb the evidence. One of the girls on scene suffered the most injuries out of all the victims, as she was stabbed multiple times after her death. There have been many suspects throughout the course of the investigation, however none of them have been confirmed guilty. The Long Beach Serial Killer. The Long Beach serial killer is an unidentified serial killer who is believed to have murdered at least a dozen people over a period of 2 decades. Allegedly, he disposed of the bodies on the south shore of Long Island. Most of the known victims were sex workers who advertised on Craigslist. Anyways, an investigation began for the search of Shannon Gilbert, a 20-year-old sex worker who disappeared from the area in May of 2010. She seemingly disappeared after escaping a client's house and making a 911 call claiming that she was in danger.
What are you in?
Long Island, like it.
Where?
Stop, Mike.
Where in Long Island?
Stop it, Mike. Mike, stop it. Hey, stop it.
A month after her disappearance, the county police department sent out an officer named John Malia to search for Shannon. Throughout the summer of 2010, John was unsuccessful and couldn't find any traces of the woman anywhere. He decided to try again on December 11th, this time staying close to roadways. John did this because according to the FBI's information, roadways are the most common spot to find dead bodies. Luckily, John's dog was able to sniff out a bag that contained the remains of someone's corpse. Investigators discovered numerous bodies while searching the area for evidence, and they suspected that all the work was done by one person, the Long Beach serial killer. The Seikogaya family murders. The Seikogaya family murders is an incident that took place in Tokyo on New Year's Eve during the year 2000. It describes the stabbing of a family of 4, the father Mikio, his wife Yasuko, as well as their children Nina and Rei. Everything began on December 30th, when a man dressed up in a quote-unquote skater outfit was spotted looking suspicious about a mile away from the family's house. Witnesses claimed that it was unusual for people to be dressed like that because it simply wasn't in style, and also it wasn't suitable for the weather. This anonymous man is suspected to be the murderer for a few reasons. First off, it stated that he was seen walking around the family's house at around 10 p.m. A close neighbor claimed that there were no abnormally loud screams or noises in the house during that night. That was up until 11 p.m. when a banging was heard from the side of the house, and the skater outfit man was seen hurrying along a nearby path. Further evidence about this man was found when a taxi driver in the area claimed that 3 strange men entered his vehicle at around 12 a.m. that same night. All of them were quiet and got dropped off at a local train station. The weirdest part about the whole interaction was that when the men got out, the driver found a blood stain on one of the back seats. He suspected that it was a result of a stab wound, and if that's true, it means that the victims of the murder were able to fight back. The following day, a neighbor trying to celebrate the new year with the family was greeted by 4 dead bodies. The police were immediately contacted, however they couldn't find any decisive evidence that points to a suspect. Now, although authorities weren't able to convict someone, they were able to find multiple specific details. For example, they found the weapon that was used, the murderer's blood type, and what the murderer ate after he committed the crime. Even with all this evidence though, the perpetrator of the Seikogaya family murder is still unknown. The Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an American serial killer active in Louisiana during the early 1900s. The Axeman was known for brutally murdering Italian-American immigrants, leading people to believe that crimes were ethnically motivated. Typically, females would be the prime target. However, if a man attempted to prevent a woman from getting murdered, he himself would get killed as well. Despite the fact that the Axeman was never identified, a letter allegedly from the man himself stated that he would kill someone at a place where jazz was not playing on the night of March 19th. The letter reads, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 on next Tuesday night, I'm going to pass over New Orleans. I'm very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going on, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on the specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. Nobody died on that night, but there did end up being more victims later on regardless. The Axeman of New Orleans was never found." Alright, this concludes the Unsolved Crime Mysteries Iceberg. Let me know what you thought of it or what intrigued you the most in the comments. That's it for this video. See ya.